In 2010, a Japanese chemical research company released footage from their underwater surveillance cams. But then, right at the end of the video, some eagle-eyed viewer spotted something that definitely shouldn't be there. It's this bizarre, misshapen blob with a disturbing grin and tiny, beady eyes. And let me tell you, this thing is the stuff of nightmares. Immediate speculation is that it's a snaggle-toothed snake eel, but the head shape is different, so what is this? Could this be the legendary Ningan? Well, this video is about to get weird. You won't want to miss this one. To understand the video I showed you, the Ningan and everything that builds around it, well, we need to go back in time. On February 13th, 1958, something strange was spotted in the icy waters of the Antarctic, and it would set the stage for things to come. Around 7 in the evening, the Soya 3 Antarctica observation ship is making its way around Barton Island, navigating through the ice, and Captain Matsumoto is at the helm, along with his navigator Yoshida and chief engineer Shigematsu, the helmsman. Now the sun's still up thanks to the time of year, so visibility is great. Now suddenly, about 1,000 feet out, they spot something floating in the water. At first, Captain Matsumoto thinks it's just an old oil drum. It's black and about the same size. But as they get closer, he realizes it's actually some kind of animal trapped in the ice. Now, here's where it gets weird. According to the captain, this thing's face looks like a cow's when viewed head-on. It's got a pair of twitching ears, which is odd for a marine animal, and the rest of its body covered in brown spotted hair with a hint of a serrated fin running down its back. Now Shigematsu races below deck to grab his camera, but by the time he gets back, the creature has freed itself from the ice and vanished. The whole sighting lasted only about half a minute, but it left a lasting impression on Captain Matsumoto. He even dubbed it the Antarctic Godzilla. Now, while this creature was small, there are many similarities to it and something seen years later that was much larger. What this captain saw could possibly have been a juvenile. Fast forward nearly 20 years, and on April 28th, 1974, or maybe a few years earlier, depending on who you ask, something seriously strange went down off the coast of New Zealand. The research Japanese whaling ship, the 28th Konpira Maru, was just minding its own business about 25 miles offshore when Captain Kimura spotted what he thought was a second buoy bobbing in the water. But as he took a closer look through the spyglass, he realized this was no buoy. No, what he saw was a gigantic head, almost human-like, sticking a solid 5 feet out of the water. And when I say gigantic, I mean this thing was so big that even with that much of it showing, the captain couldn't even see its mouth. What he could see, though, were its eyes. Big, goggly, reddish eyes. Each one 4 to 5 inches wide. The skin was all wrinkled and grayish brown, and it had a pair of nostrils that looked weirdly crushed. The captain was so baffled by this, he sketched out what he saw later on. Now, at first, he thought it might be a submarine, and then he considered a new type of whale or a seriously lost walrus. However, none of that made sense, and the closest thing he could come up with was a massive hippo, but that was just as crazy. Hippos don't exactly hang out in the ocean near New Zealand. So Captain Kimura ordered his crew to ready the harpoons and steer straight for this thing. But as soon as they got within about 100 feet, poof, it vanished beneath the waves, leaving nothing but a trail in the water and a very confused captain. They nicknamed it the Cagon, or hippo monster. But even the captain admitted that didn't quite fit, because let's be real, what they saw that day sure sounded a lot more like a colossal humanoid head. In fact, the Konpira Maru headed back to Japan without any hard evidence, and the captain was hesitant to report it for fear of sounding crazy. But a few days later, folks in the nearest town began reporting weird footprints by the shore. Coincidence? I think not. Now you have to understand that around this time, the Japanese whaling industry was in a tough spot. I mean, sure, it was still making money and was a big part of their culture, but the rest of the world was putting a lot of pressure on them to stop for the sake of the environment. So two things happened. First, the industry shrank a lot. Second, the government started doing what they call research whaling. And basically, instead of hunting a bunch of whales, they would only catch a few and then they would dissect them and study them. The idea was that by doing this, they could get a better understanding of how the whale population as a whole was doing, which should lead to more sustainable hunting practices. At least that was the theory. But this is where it gets interesting. With all this focus on research whaling, you have to wonder, did they stumble across something they weren't expecting? Something like, oh, I don't know, the Cagon? So does this mean that the creature spotted back in 1958 truly was just a juvenile? It is a tantalizing possibility. And if there really is a connection between these two sightings, it raises even more questions. What is it? Where did it come from? Is it some kind of previously unknown species or something else entirely? And why has it been spotted in such far-flung locations from the Antarctic to the waters off New Zealand? What's interesting is around this same time, stories began popping up that a report of the Cagon actually was made, and that officials were taking a serious interest in this mysterious creature. There were even allegations that the Japanese government was trying to keep a tight lid on the whole thing, supposedly issuing gag orders to eyewitnesses. Now, it doesn't seem like they were actively investigating the Cagon, but it sure sounds like they were keeping a close eye on any news reports. But you know how it goes. Some of those sightings still managed to slip through the cracks. Sadly, folks, the true identity of the creatures spotted in 1958 and 1974 remain inconclusive. Years ago, an anonymous Japanese whistleblower explained that they learned something disturbing through a trusted source who works as a marine life researcher at Hokkaido University. This friend revealed that in the northern seas, there's a creature called the Hitogata that no one knows about yet. And here's where it gets really unsettling. According to the researcher, this thing is massive. I mean, like 15 to 20 meters long, but that's not even the worst part. Apparently, it has what looks like a human face. A giant unknown sea creature with a human face, and it gets worse. The researcher claims that this Hitogata often runs away when you try to talk to it, and sometimes it talks back. We're not just dealing with a mysterious massive sea creature here, we're talking about one that might be intelligent enough to communicate. Now, the whistleblower was understandably skeptical at first, and they asked their friend that if such a creature exists, wouldn't it have already been found? But the researcher's response was chilling, and they informed the friend that some fishermen do know about the Hitogata's existence, but for some reason, they won't talk about it. And apparently, it's often seen during the cold winter months. Now, a bunch of additional sightings began taking place in the 1990s, the most notable being a whaling vessel that claimed to have encountered something truly bizarre while conducting research off the coast of Antarctica. Now, at first, the crew thought they had spotted just another whale, but as they got closer, they realized it wasn't a whale at all. In fact, it wasn't anything like they'd ever seen before. What surfaced near their ship was this massive humanoid creature, somewhere between 60 to 100 feet long. Its skin was pure white, the color and texture of whale blubber, but this was no whale. This thing was very much alive, and disturbingly, it had the rough features of an enormous human being. Now, the crew dubbed this creature the Ningan, which simply means human in Japanese. In this initial sighting, the eyewitnesses claimed that the Ningan had the vague outline of a head, a torso, two massive arms, and a pair of gigantic legs. Now, since then, other sightings of the Ningan have popped up on the internet, and each one adding a new and sometimes conflicting detail. Some claim that the creature's arms end in flippers, while others insist that they have hands with 5 fingers, just like a human. There are even some who say the Ningan resembles a massive mermaid, but one thing that seems to be consistent across most sightings is the creature's face. Witnesses say that when facial features are visible, the Ningan has a large, slit-like mouth and eyes that are either tiny and beady or enormous and gaping, similar to the eyes described by Captain Kimura and the crew of the Konpira Maru. Now, if this whistleblower and their researcher friend are telling the truth, then we've got a giant, intelligent, human-faced creature swimming around in the northern seas, and the locals are keeping it a secret. But why? What are they afraid of? If there are creatures out there that are not only physically imposing, but also possess a frightening level of intelligence, then what else might be lurking in the depths of the ocean? It's a question that keeps me up at night, and I have a feeling I'm not the only one. Now, what's fascinating here is there's another creature called the Yumi Boou, a spirit or yokai that's said to live under the sea. And let me tell you folks, this thing is bad news. Now, according to legend, whenever this thing pops up from the water, it can turn a calm day into a raging storm in an instant, and if it appears to sailors, well, they're in for a rough time. The Yumi Boou either wrecks their ship or demands a bucket or bail from them, which it then uses to drown the poor sailors one by one. The descriptions of this thing sound an awful lot like the Cagon sightings dating back from the 1970s. I mean, we're talking gigantic, with a size measured in yards than feet. And when it first appears, all you see is this huge head popping out of the water. In fact, the only real difference between the Kampira Maru incident and the Yumi Boou legends is that the Yumi Boou is usually described as being dark black instead of gray. Oh, and the fact that Yumi Boou sightings always seem to end in tragedy. Looking back, it sounds like the crew of the Kampira Maru got off lucky. Now, get this. If you dig around a bit, you'll find another name that's been thrown around, the Ningan. And folks, probably the most eerie part about this whole Ningan thing is the fact that, unlike Bigfoot, dogman, mothman, reptilians, etc., there's actually a lot of photographs of this mysterious thing. In fact, this photograph was actually taken during the 1990 sighting, and even though it's not very detailed, you can clearly make out the shape. This alone would be enough to frighten any sailor. Now, fast forward to 2007, and the Ningan photos and videos have begun to surface on various spots on the internet. Of course, many of the photographs are most likely fake, but even today, photographs of this thing continue to pop up on the internet, and folks, no one can figure out what this thing is. Now, what's really weird is in 2008, a photo taken with Google Earth revealed something odd. Researchers who discovered this photo believe it to show the infamous Ningan. Of course, officials were quick to just deem it nothing more than an iceberg, and yeah, that's of course a possibility, but if it was a Ningan, do you think the officials would admit to it? Probably not. Otherwise, you'd be talking about a major scientific breakthrough, right? Unfortunately, these things will probably never be revealed to the public, and it's very possible that as we moved into the last 30-40 years, that more documentation will prove that something beyond the norm does exist. For now, it just remains a mystery. Footage taken from a 2010 chemical company out of Japan that was conducting underwater surveillance captured something bizarre. Many were quick to point out that this is nothing abnormal at all and can easily be dismissed as a snaggle-toothed snake eel. I mean, sure, there are similarities, but the head and face are different. Plus, we don't have great context of the perspective in this footage. The truly interesting part is that there are more videos like this one that honestly leaves a lot of people scratching their heads, grasping at straws for answers, because simply there are none. Now, of course, it could be fake, but assuming it's real, don't you see what looks like a pair of arms and what might be a stumpy head? I mean, I have no idea what lives in the ocean that looks like that. At least, nothing we've discovered as of today. If we assume it's fake, then the bad quality could easily cover up for the CGI, and not to mention its unnecessarily short duration. At this point, we've looked at a lot of things that these things are not, but could there perhaps be some rational explanation for them? Well, one idea that's been tossed around is that the Ningan might be a previously unknown species of giant ray. And when I say giant ray, I mean massive. We're talking a ray that's been supersized to an almost unbelievable degree, but how could a creature that big go unnoticed for so long, especially in the modern era? It is a fair question, but some scientists have suggested that we've only cataloged about 20% of all the species in the world's oceans. That's a lot of uncharted territory, and it leaves plenty of room for something like a giant ray to hide out, especially if it primarily sticks to the icy waters of the Antarctic. So, could a huge albino ray have evolved to blend in with the floating icebergs and frozen debris of its chilly home? I mean, it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility. And if such a creature did exist, it's easy to see how it might be mistaken for something more fantastical like a humanoid sea monster. But here's the thing, even if we allow for the existence of a giant albino ray, it's still a stretch to get from there to the Ningan, as it's been described. I mean, we're talking about a creature with a distinctly humanoid shape, complete with arms, legs, and even facial features. I'm going to go out on a whim here and suggest something more on the paranormal nature. Demons. Yes, you heard me right. Let me explain. Now, Japanese folklore is absolutely brimming with all sorts of incredible creatures, many of which fall under the category of yokai. These are mystical entities that often have animal-like features. You've got the kappa, which looks like a turtle-shelled primate, and the baku, which resembles a strange elephant-like creature. The list goes on and on. I mean, I know it sounds far-fetched, but in the grand scheme of things, is it really that much stranger than the idea of a giant humanoid sea creature? And let's not forget that Japan has a rich history of supernatural beliefs and encounters. From vengeful spirits to shape-shifting foxes, the paranormal is deeply ingrained in Japanese culture. So, is it really that much of a stretch to think that the Ningan might be another manifestation of this fascination with the otherworldly? Or what if they aren't biological or paranormal? What if they're mechanical? USOs, or unidentified submersible objects, are underwater versions of the UFOs. Now, these strange vehicles are said to be able to soar through the air and plunge into the depths of the ocean with equal ease. And get this, even Christopher Columbus reported seeing them, and sightings have continued to this day. Now, most people assume that USOs are some kind of highly advanced technology, either from another world or created by an underwater civilization that's way more advanced than we are. But what if we've got it all wrong? What if these objects aren't vehicles at all, but actually living creatures? I mean, think about it. The Ningan, with their oddly shaped bodies and stiff, almost mechanical movements, could easily be mistaken for some kind of underwater craft. What if they're the real USOs? And all these sightings of supposed submersible vehicles are actually just glimpses of these bizarre creatures. In the videos that supposedly show these creatures, they move so stiffly and mechanically. It's a wild theory, but in actuality, we don't know. Now, that brings us to our last possible conclusion. Aliens. The guy from Ancient Aliens had it right all along, if you consider all the incredible diverse forms of life we have right here on Earth. So the idea of aliens coming in a wild array of shapes and sizes doesn't seem so far-fetched anymore. I mean, if aliens visit here, is it possible that some could or would be aquatic? Now, what I find fascinating is that we as humans, we have this inherent bias towards terrestrial life. We live on land, so we assume that's the norm, but the truth is, we're actually the minority when it comes to life on Earth. The vast majority of creatures on this planet call the water home. So if some cosmic species was attracted to our world, maybe they'd be looking for a nice place to settle down below. And let's face it, the Earth has water in spades. Now, obviously, these are nothing more than theories because, like I've said, sometimes you have to be willing to entertain even the most outlandish possibilities, because you never know where the truth might lie. So far, all of the water giants that we've discussed have been confined to the ocean, especially the regions around the planet's poles and the waters of the South Pacific. But did you know that the waterways of America sometimes hold gigantic aquatic humanoids as well? Near Chaleur in New Brunswick, the local Micmac nation once feared a creature that they referred to as the Gugu, a creature said to patrol the waters around not only New Brunswick, but Nova Scotia as well. It appears several times in the writings of early French explorer Samuel de Champlain, who charted some of Canada's northern waterways. Tribal wisdom describes the Gugu as having big hands and the hairy face of a bear, but with flat, well, no long snout and no visible ears. Does that sound familiar? Well, it should. Many cryptozoologists today connect the Gugu to none other than Bigfoot. But there's one important difference. The Gugu is said to be really fond of water. While there have been plenty of stories featuring Bigfoot swimming, the Gugu seems different. Explorers talking to the Micmac learned that, in no uncertain terms, the Gugu was, and I quote, certainly amphibious, implying that it didn't just swim in water occasionally, it spent a lot of time there. It was said that the Gugu waited in the water, ready to devour passing ships in a single bite. And the Gugu is also said to be incredibly tall, much taller than your typical Bigfoot. There are references to the beast being a fearful monster in the shape of a woman as tall as the mast of a ship. Interesting description. So, in Canada, we have something that sounds really similar to the Cagon and the Ningan, a gigantic humanoid that lives in the water. Is this a coincidence or something more? Now, one of the earliest recorded descriptions of the Gugu comes directly from Samuel de Champlain himself. Although he used a lot of outdated language, it still makes for an interesting read. Champlain wrote this.
There is one strange thing worthy of an account, which many savages have assured me was true. That is, that near the Bay of Heat, toward the south, there is an island where a frightful monster makes his home, which the savages call Gugu. It had the form of a woman, but very terrible, and such a size that they told me the tops of the masts of our vessel would not reach to his waist. So great do they represent him, and they say that he is often eaten up and still continues to eat up many savages. These he puts, when he can catch them, into a great pocket, and afterwards he eats them. And those who had escaped the danger of this awful beast said that its pocket was so great that it could have put our vessel into it. This monster makes horrible noises on this island, and when they speak of it, it is with unutterable fear, and several have assured me that they have seen him. While going in search of mines, one man passed so near the haunt of this terrible beast that he and all those on board his vessel heard strange hissings from the noise she made, and the savages with him told him it was the same creature, and they were so afraid that they hid themselves wherever they could for fear that she would come and carry them off.
Did you catch that? Remember, Champlain said that the supposed pocket on the Gugu was big enough to fit an entire ship. To me, this sounds less like a Bigfoot and more like one of those giant ocean humanoids that we've been talking about. One Micmac story emphasizes the sheer size of this Micmac water monster. In his book, On the Trail of Elder Brother, Michael B. Runningwolf collected indigenous stories of the Glooscap, a folk hero said to be the embodiment of the Great Spirit. Well, one of these stories finds Glooscap investigating a stream that has run dry, and he follows it to a camp where strange people with webbed hands and feet tell him that the water is being controlled by their chief. If the stream has any chance of being restored, Glooscap would have to ask permission from this creature. Here's Michael's description of the chief of the web-handed people.
This creature was as big as a mountain, with a grinning mouth that stretched a mile from ear to ear. His yellow eyes stared out his head like two enormous pine knots. His swollen body was covered with ugly warts. This creature had made himself a huge burrow at the source of the stream and dammed it all up to create a great reservoir. Now, almost no water made its way to the stream bed. He had also fouled the reservoir and made it so poisonous that fetid mists hung above its oily surface.
Now, as the story goes, Glooscap tricked the monster into trying to eat him. When it tried, Glooscap grew to the size of the tallest pine tree, essentially locking the monster's mouth open. He then slashed at the creature, releasing all the water it had stolen, saving his people. So, what do you think? The Cagon, the Ningan, and the Gugu, they all sound like they're describing the same thing, or at least something similar. Is it a coincidence that we have two sets of tales from halfway across the globe, Japan and Canada, that describe gigantic humanoids living in the water? Or is there something more to these stories? Could it just be that there are giants living in the dark depths of our ocean, beings that are not just simple animals, but have their own intelligence? And are the governments of the world hiding this secret? Well, let me know what you think down below. And because you guys made it this far into the episode, I want you to all comment down below what lurks beneath the waves. So that way I know who made it to the end of the episode and who didn't. And if you guys enjoyed this style of cinematic, detail-rich storytelling, then go ahead and slap that like and subscribe button for more content just like this. As always, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next episode.